Well, again, we say good evening to everyone and welcome to Church History 101 and 102. We're just glad to see everybody on tonight. And this is an interesting course and it has a lot of information that's going to be able to help you to understand why it is necessary to be able to study church history. I have sent out a guideline for us on tonight that talks about the 10 reasons to read about church history. So those of you who have your guidelines, your reasons, we're going to talk about these, and then we're going to move on with some other prevalent information relating to church history. And he begins to talk about in this article, whether church history is what gets you out of bed in the morning, or you always thought it was just dusty old books and grimy old men. There must be a reason that we do church history, because remember, this church history is a part of Christian faith. And a lot of times what people do is that they don't spend a lot of time studying church history. We study all other things as it relates to the Bible. But whenever we begin to think about the history behind all of this stuff, a lot of times we don't study it. So there are 10 reasons why we do this. Number one, church history is surprisingly accessible. It's full of men and women like you and me. And that's what it is. Whenever we think about church history, if we were to think about Deborah, we were able to think about Moses, and we were thinking about Hezekiah, we think about any men or women in the Bible, we would be able to put it back to who we are. Because many fear approaching church history because it feels like the record of an alien time and an ancient people. And this is what I was sharing with you all earlier. This can be a fun class because if you like history, and be able to explore back, on the things that happened, you're going to love this course. If you don't like history, I want to hope that whenever we're done, you all will have that same enthusiasm that I have as to learn more, about church history. Because remember, I shared with you earlier, we do have church history 2 in our doctoral program. In this particular setting, is that we're going to be looking at from Christ to the pre-Reformation, the rise and growth of the church and its culture. You want to write this down? We're going to be looking at culture. We're going to be looking at intellectual, and we're going to be looking at political context. 3 contexts we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at the cultural context. We're going to be looking at the intellectual context, and we're going to be looking at the political context. And whenever I begin telling you all earlier that we're going to have some debates about certain things, because politically, you would be amazed when we get to that part that politically, some of the things that are existing now, guess what? They existed back then as well. And so we're going to have some fun in that avenue too. Because yet the story of the church history is, it talks about God's people, men and women like us throughout the history. So what I want you to do, first assignment, I want you all to think about somebody in the church history that you can equate yourself to. Because number one, it says like this: church history is surprisingly, it's accessible to us. We're going to get it in the book, and we're going to get it from some more information that we're going to be sending out. And what happens is that during this time, like I shared earlier, that it's the men and women just like us in the Bible that's making this, that made this history. And to be honest, guess what? We're making history right now. We are making history right now. So what I want you all to do, first assignment, is to think about somebody in the Bible that you can equate your life to. Somebody in the Bible. Deborah. Who else? Anybody else? Naomi. Whoever in the Bible that you can equate yourself to. And that's the first assignment that I want you all to do. We'll talk about in a minute when it's due and all of those things. Because as we explore church history, we find people, again, just like us. We find the downtrodden and the oppressed. We find the rulers and the powerful and everything in between. Think about David. Think about Saul. Then go to the New Testament. You begin to think about Saul, whose name turned to Paul. Think about Timothy, Bartholomew, all of these people that you could think about. So again, None of us should be lax as to who we can equate our who we look like or who we can become familiar with in the Bible. All of us have sinned, remember this, and fallen short of the glory of God. But all who accept Christ offer is salvation, and guess what? We get redeemed. The historic church is made up of brothers and sisters from across the globe. And guess what? These are all our family. These are all our family. So think about this again. First assignment, look in the Bible, or if you already know, what is that person that you can identify with? And then talk about why and how you identify with that person. Because like I said again, church history is comprised of things of people just like you and me. Number two, God promised to keep his church, and history shows that he is faithful. God is always faithful. He is always faithful. Though the church is made up of men and women, it is kept by the sovereign God of history. Christianity is a historical faith, and our scriptures are historical texts. In the New Testament, God promises to keep his church, and that's what he said. In the New Testament, he's going to keep his church, and he promises that the church will endure until Christ's return. And I'm going to take questions in just a minute. So understand that God has promised that he's going to keep his church, and he says he's going to keep his church until Christ's return. Number three, church history displays God's sovereignty over all of creation, past and present. God's sovereignty is total. Scripture tells us this, and history again shows this to be a wonderful truth. What a blessing to know that God is going to keep his people again. And he holds to the creation, and he holds the creation in his hand. We can go to Genesis 1 and begin to know how he created everything. We can know that. We see a history of not just heroes, but okay, you got the weak and the feeble too. You honestly do. And so, but guess what? All of those people, whether they were weak and feeble or not, God had a reason to use them. God had a reason to use them. Church history is incredible because it allows us time and again to see the evidence of God at work. So all during this time we're studying, whenever we're studying, we're going to be able to see God at work in everything that we're doing. Everything that we're doing. Number four, church history encourages us to give God glory for what he has done. As we unpack church history, and that's what we're going to do, we're going to be able to unpack all this stuff. This is what we're doing. We're unpacking stuff. We're unpacking. And we are struck time and time again by God's incredible power. Because as we build on church history, even whenever we begin to talk about Jesus in the beginning of the church, whenever we're going to build on that, because guess what? Jesus was born according to modern calendar about 4 BC or earlier, while Herod the Great, by the will of Rome, was the king of Judea. And then we understand that Jesus' popularity provoked jealousy and opposition from the Pharisees and a range of sentiments from uneasiness to profound disturbances among political leaders. And so we know that whenever Jesus was born, guess what? Whenever he was born, it was sort of semi-chaotic, but guess what? It was chaos to the best of us, not for the worst for us. Now, whenever we think, and I'm on number four, whenever we think about God alone, it is God alone whose time and time again pours out his blessing on his church. And it's right that we glorify him for this. In Revelation 7, John is shown a vision of the throne room of God. Around the throne, he sees a lot of angels, and they cry out, and we talk about verse 12. They say, praise and glory and wisdom and thanks and honor and power and strength be to our God forever and evermore. So we're praising God from the beginning to the end. Whenever we talk about church history, that's what we're doing. And then we see number five, church history is like scripture. It encourages us to look and learn from those who have gone before us. That's why I gave you that assignment. That is why I gave you that assignment. We see that all of those who have gone before us, they've done great things. And I like what whenever we talk about this, some of them were weak, but God, guess what? Through his word made them strong. And so that's one thing that you could look at as well. David had a concern, but guess what? It ended up David being a man after God's own heart. Whenever we think about the fact that we talk about people being weak, we think about how the children of Israel wanted a king. Guess what? Saul was not their choice, but guess what? They wanted a king. He gave them just that. And we know how that panned out, because really God had another choice. But that's what God does sometimes. He does not push himself on us. What he does is that he encourages us to go the way that he has put in place for us. But guess what? Sometimes we veer off that way. But God is faithful and just to be able to push us or allow things to happen that will get us right back on the same track. Whenever we look at, again, all of these, number 6, church history challenges our chronological sobriety. And that's what we're going to talk about too, because whenever we talk about a chronological order, you all know that whenever we pick up a Bible, guess what? Whenever we see Genesis, we see Exodus, we can go on down and we can go into the New Testament and see that is not the chronological fit of the Bible. And I think those have had another class with me know I talked about that at some point. That is not the chronological way that things happen in the Bible. So for those who are Bible readers, and know all of you are, you may want to invest in a chronological Bible, because in that Bible, it will show you exactly the way things happen. You can be reading in Exodus, and it may help. It may take you to Numbers. You may be reading another chapter, another book, and it take you there. But the sequences, when we talk about, they're in chronological order, and that can really help you in your ministry. It can also help you in your study as well, because that's what needs to that Bible needs to be used more in the church. Be able to understand the true chronological way that things happen. So that's a good thing that we're gonna be looking a little bit at as well. Number 7, church history helps us to learn from our mistakes. Though there is much wisdom to glean from our long Christian history, the church has been involved in great sin throughout the years, and that is true. Again, I can't go, we go back to David, Bathsheba, that experience. We talk about Solomon, God told Solomon, don't go down there, with the women, down there. But guess what? Solomon went down there, got all tangled up and everything. And that was his press whenever he began to write Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. And that's why he starts out whenever he's talking in Proverbs, he says, my brothers, because he had all these people sitting there, and he wanted to teach them some of the mistakes that he had made so that they wouldn't go back and make the same mistakes again. All right. We need to have a better understanding of church history. Again, looking at the good and the bad, because it's going to equip us so we won't repeat some of the things that are in the church history. Number 8, church history reminds us that the Great Commission was for all of God's people. The Great Commission was not just for a chosen few, but it was for everybody. That's one of the reasons that, and this is something that we know, but we get refreshed on it, because my sentiments to all of this is that we'll be forever learning until we leave this earth. And so whenever we can stretch out our learning pattern, that's when we know that we're going to be more susceptible for God to pour more into us. And whenever we talk about the Great Commission, go ye therefore in all the world, make disciples, because Jesus began to tell his disciples, he said, I got to go away. He said, if I don't go away, the Comforter will not come. Because remember, Jesus was it was only 12 of them, and they were only comprised of this area, a certain area. But he was saying, if you go away, the Comforter come, guess what? More disciples could be made, and they could go out and they could bring more disciples in. So that's why we talk about the fact that we need to understand about the Great Commission and why it is really there. Number 9, church history is diverse. It so explores from athletes to stories of faith, medieval Rome to the first generation of the post-apostolic church. There is so much to explore, and we're going to be exploring the Apostles' Creed. why that came about. Was there another creed before the Apostles' Creed? We're going to be exploring all of that. We're going to be talking about women who were almost burned to stake, because guess what? They wanted to be, they were martyrs, because of their love for Jesus Christ. All that stuff we're going to be talking about. And church history, again, is fascinating. It will only be boring if you allow it to be boring. And we're going to learn so much, because there's so much to explore in the long history of church history. It's necessary. It'll encourage you. It'll help you to think about things different, more different than you've thought about it before. And so this is the reason I wanted to go over these 10 reasons with you. I hope that you have made notes or underlined stuff as I've talked. If you're not, you can ask me questions, and I'll be able to explain it even more. Because whenever we think about the other page of notes that I sent out to you, and we're going to be starting on that at our next class when we talk about Jesus and the beginning of the church, because that's where the church began. Jesus is the beginning of the church. Whenever we understand that, then we're able to move forward. Because that's how the story begins. That's how the setting starts. It starts right there. So what we're going to do is that we're going to take a break, and I'm going to answer any questions that you may have. And well, first of all, I'm going to answer the questions. I'm sorry. Then we're going to take a break. Then we're going to come back, and we're going to begin on church history, the second part.